Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to New Brit Workshop. I'm making two videos about e-bikes. Now, although this first video is going to describe what an e-bike is and why you might want one, I'm going to also include little bits of my research. And the reason for that is it actually gave me information about what an e-bike was in the first place. And so I'll be mixing a little bit of my research into this. However, in the second video, I go into the detail about how I went about my research and how I went about choosing the particular e-bikes that my wife and I now have. Now, last year my wife and I were lucky enough to be able to visit the Gazelle e-bike experience centre in a Dutch town of Waalwijk. Now, I hope I pronounced that correctly. And there we were able to confirm a lot of our research and gain a lot more useful information. Now, although that will feature in the second video in particular, I'm going to include some little bits from Waalwijk in this video because it does help to explain what an e-bike is. So what is an e-bike? Well, if you take a normal bicycle, add to it an electric motor, a battery, and some means of controlling the motor and monitoring the battery, then essentially you've got an e-bike. And e-bikes, or pedelecs as they're called on the continent, are governed by EU law and also UK law. At the moment, the EU law and the UK law are pretty close to each other. And so I think it's best to concentrate on the EU law. First of all, an e-bike will have a maximum speed of 25 kilometers an hour. With an e-bike, you have to be pedalling in order to get any assistance from the motor. And I think this is the one grey area, if I remember correctly, with UK law. And I think there is some allowance in UK law for e-bikes which you just sit back and turn a throttle. And that's not what I'm describing in this video or the next one. The motor size has a maximum power of 250 watts. And you may not think, well, what does that mean? Well, actually 250 watts is quite a powerful motor when it comes to assisting a cyclist. You're allowed to have a function whereby if you're having to push the bicycle up a steep hill, that you have what is known as walk assist. And that's the only time where the bicycle can be given assistance from the motor without the user pedalling. Let me just take an aside there and give you a quick demo of walk assist. We put the bikes on the back of the car and travelled down to a town in North Dorset. The town is called Shaftesbury, and they have a really steep hill there called Gold Hill. So I was sent down Gold Hill and made to push the bicycle up the hill. And I used walk assist to get it to the top. So there we go, that's walk assist. In the UK there is a lower age limit of 14 in order to be able to ride an e-bike. And currently there's no requirement for insurance for e-bikes either in the UK or in Europe. So now we know that an e-bike has got a motor with a battery and it's going to help you cycle. And we also know that you've got to be pedalling in order for that motor to be assisting you. So it's not a question of turning a throttle and watching the hedgerow disappear down the road. You've actually got to be doing some work. And one of the easy ways of thinking about an e-bike is that if you're on a hill that's like that with an ordinary bike, when you're riding an e-bike, then that hill is a little bit like that. So you've got to put in a fair amount of work still, but it's not going to be as bad. And on the flat, I often don't have my motor switched on at all. There's hardly any need. Now, the motor can go in a number of different places. There are three standard places to put the motor. It can be in the front wheel axle, the rear wheel axle, or in the main hub or crank where the pedals are. Now, the difference between the three, front mounted, rear mounted and mid mounted, are quite considerable. It's difficult to describe, but let's just hear what I learnt in the e-bike experience centre. Are there any particular reasons why one should go for either front, middle or rear
Yes, they are. You need to realize that how the motor is reacting on you is different between a front motor and a mid motor.
Yeah.
Because the front motor only looks at if you go around with pedals. If you go around with pedals, the motor will help you. So the front motor, you see people who have problems with their knees or not getting enough strength on the pedals to get so much support. So people who drive a short distance or have that kind of problems often choose a front motor. If you look at the mid motor, it's just a bit different.
Yeah, so well, basically what we're saying is for perhaps people who are a little bit older or have a little bit of disability, they've got bad knees or whatever, then the front motor would be for them, and the mid motor for everyone else, and for performance as well.
Yes, yes. So people who want to drive a bit further, say around 50 kilometers or more, they often choose the middle of the mid motor. Because the mid motor also looks, if you go around with the pedals, but also are you putting some pressure on the pedals? Yeah. So it feels more naturally.
I understand. Now, I know you don't do them, but what about the rear-mounted motor? Is there any particular
The rear-mounted motor has a reaction that gives a push in the back. So it's like you get support, but from behind you, so you get a little push.
Yeah. So the motor position will alter the dynamics of the bicycle. It will alter the way that the bicycle feels as far as the user goes. And so it's important before you make your choice of which bicycle you want, you decide what type of motor arrangement you want. And the only way to do that is to go and try a bicycle. Now, it may be possible if you've got friends with e-bikes to try different ones, but in reality, you've got to go to an e-bike centre, a shop or whatever. Now, again, in my research, I found a website from a company operating in Guildford. I've never been there. I've had no support from them for this video or anything else, but they're called Electric Bikes Guildford. And they've got a good website. You get a lot of information from the website, but also they are a major e-bike stockist, and I know that they will give you the opportunity to ride different types of e-bikes. So I'm actually grateful for the information that they've provided free of charge on the website. Very useful indeed. Now, batteries are the next consideration, and most e-bikes will come with a choice of perhaps 2 or even 3 different capacities of battery. And the batteries are a major part of the expense of an e-bike. They are certainly not cheap. So when you choose the bike and you choose the battery, make a very careful choice about that battery, because getting a replacement battery of a higher capacity at a later stage will be very expensive. So go for the size of battery at the very beginning that you are certain you will need. Batteries may be mounted on the rear carrier or on the frame of the bicycle, and sometimes when they're mounted on the frame, they look as though they're integrated. They aren't. They are always removable because, of course, batteries do eventually die, and so they need to be replaced. But either rear-mounted or on the frame somewhere. The exceptions to that, I believe the Brompton electric bike, which is a fairly recent innovation from that wonderful bicycle company, I think their battery goes on the front handlebar in some way. Now, I've not actually physically seen an electric Brompton. I've got an ordinary one, but not the electric one, but that's my understanding. And of course, batteries need to be recharged. And in order to do that, you plug a transformer into the mains, plug it into the battery. Battery may be on the bike, it may be off the bike when you do that charging. And batteries would typically take you on a 50, 60 mile cycle ride, and higher capacity batteries might take you a little bit longer. And of course, the length of your cycle ride will depend on the setting you use for the amount of assistance that the electric motor is giving you. So if you're in a position where you hardly need any assistance at all, then that battery will last for a greater length journey. And if you are in a really hilly area and you're putting a lot of demand on the motor, that in turn puts a lot of demand on the battery, and therefore the actual overall distance that you can travel with that single charge is going to be a lot less. Now, I said that batteries are expensive, and therefore you've got to think at the very beginning about battery care. And if you're not going to look after your battery properly, then you're going to halve its life. So read the instructions that come with your e-bike and make sure you're prepared to follow the regime that it recommends for the care of the battery. And typically that would mean that you don't recharge it fully after every cycle ride, only if it needs to be charged. You don't store it in extremes of temperature, either high or low. And if you do store it for any length of time, then you store it at a certain capacity of charge, not fully charged and not fully discharged. So those are some considerations that you need to follow if you're going to improve your battery life. I know the next question is likely to be, well, how long will my battery last if I look after it? Well, it depends on how much you use the bicycle. If you're commuting every day on your bicycle, and let's say that means you're recharging the battery 150 times a year, maybe 200 times a year, then your battery's not going to last more than about 4 or 5 years. But if you're like my wife and I, where we use our e-bikes for leisure activity, then frankly I think those batteries will probably see us out. Now the third component, of course, is the control mechanism for controlling how the motor reacts to your cycling or how the motor assists you with your cycling. And there are all sorts of different options, and I'm not going to describe them in any great detail, but I'll just give you a feel for what you should expect from a motor controller. First of all, it'll be mounted on the handlebar somewhere, and it may be in two parts, a central part as I have and my wife has on her bike, and then something near your left or right hand where you can do some additional controls without having to take your hand physically off the handlebar. And the sort of things you can control are, first of all, the amount of assistance that the electric motor is giving you. And in our case, we have 4 levels, actually technically 5, because you can have the motor switched off if you wish, and you can still ride the bicycle perfectly normally. But those 4 levels start at the lowest, where you get a little bit of assistance, and then they gradually ramp up. And you would choose those different assistance levels according to the terrain that you're on. And if you're in a really hilly area, you may be creeping up to the highest level of assistance. Now, most of these controllers will give you some feedback as to how many calories you're burning, how many miles you've traveled that day, how many miles you've been total since you bought the bike, and what your average speed was, and things like that. Some go into greater detail and give you information about the cadence, that's the sort of the rate that you're pedaling, about how much effort you're putting in yourself and how much assistance you're getting from the bike, and so on. It gives you all sorts of analytical possibilities. Now, my controller, which goes with my mid-mounted Bosch motor, is a thing called a Nion, and that has the capability of giving me navigational information. I can see a picture of a map in any country in the world. It can guide me from A to B. It gives me all of the analytical information that I would ever want, in fact more than I would ever need. And then when I get back to base, it automatically synchronizes with my computer, and I can then, at my leisure, look at my computer and see where I've been, how far it was, how many calories I've burned, etc. Calories? Me? Well, you know what I mean. So there are different possibilities with different manufacturers and with different controllers offered by the manufacturers. Well, I hope now you've got a better idea of what an e-bike is, and maybe you're starting to form ideas about what sort of e-bike you might like. In the second video, I'll be going through the complete process that my wife and I went through when we were making our own choices about which make and model of e-bike to buy. I'll also be taking you back to that e-bike experience centre in Walwick. Pronunciation again, not sure. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.